Anytime you make a measurement, there is always some amount of uncertainty. In science, it's very important to record your measurements accurately to show how certain your measurement actually is. If you're using an instrument with a digital display, the instrument does the estimation for you. But if you're reading something like a ruler or a graduated cylinder, you need to do that estimation yourself. If we look at the line over this ruler, we can clearly see that the line definitely goes past the 5 mark, but not quite to the 6. So we know it is definitely 5 point something. Also, we can see that it definitely reaches the 0.6 mark, but doesn't quite get to the 0.7 mark. So we know the 0.6 for certain. But the in between the two lines is where we're going to have to do the estimation. I estimated this to be a 5, but other people might estimate it to be a 4 or 6. So 5.65 is the number that I would record when measuring this line. The 5.6 is absolutely certain. We can see those markings that that's how long the line is. But that last digit, the 5, is where our uncertainty comes into play. We're not positive about that 0.5 because there's no marking. It is extremely important to record all of your measurements to the correct number of significant figures, to always go one place beyond where the markings are, so that anyone who looks at your data knows how good your instrument is. Now, when we already have the numbers, we need to figure out how many significant figures there are. These are the rules that tell us what numbers are significant. Non-zero numbers always count as significant figures. So anything that's not a 0 is automatically significant. However, the zeros can either be at the beginning of the number, the middle of the number, or the end of the number. And depending on what type of 0 it is, there are going to be different rules. Middle zeros, zeros in the middle of a number, are always significant. If you look at the 2005, those zeros are in the middle of the number. They're sandwiched in between two non-zero numbers. The zeros between the 5 and the 3 here are also middle zeros, so those will be significant. Zeros at the beginning of a number are never significant, so the 0.00000, all of those zeros are considered beginning zeros, and they are not significant. They are important, and you do need to write them down, but they do not count as significant figures. Ending zeros are the tricky ones. Ending zeros will count, but only if there is a decimal point somewhere in the number. For example, the first 10 here, that 0 is at the end of the number. There's no non-zero number beyond it. But there's no decimal point in the number, so that ending 0 would not be significant. The 1 is a non-zero number, so it is. That 0 is an ending 0 with no decimal point in the number. This 10 would only have one significant figure. But if we look at the one below it, I've recorded a decimal point. Because there is now a decimal point in the number, that ending 0 is significant. So 10 without a decimal point only has one significant figure, but 10 with a decimal point has 2. Down at the bottom, I have 10.00000. All of those zeros are ending zeros, and there is a decimal point in the number. That means that all of those ending zeros are significant. When you're recording numbers, in math, 10 and 10 with a decimal point are the same thing. However, in science, they represent different amounts of accuracy in your measurement. This number here, we've got a 2 with lots of zeros at the end, no decimal point. Again, those are ending zeros, no decimal point. This number will only have one significant figure. This last rule is really going to come into play when we start doing calculations. And it says numbers from counting and defined quantities. For example, there are 60 seconds in a minute. Have unlimited number of significant figures. If I count the number of people in a room, I can't have a fraction of a person. So if there were 5 people in the room, that would be 5.00000 indefinitely, because it couldn't be 4.9 or 5.1 people. That wouldn't make sense. The same thing with 60 seconds in a minute. That is a defined quantity. It is defined to be exactly 60 seconds in 1 minute. Now, if I want to have some ending zeros to be significant and not others, which is going to be important when we start doing calculations with these, I can place a bar over a 0 to note that it is the last digit that is significant. For example, this 200,000, as it is written, there's no decimal point. It only has one significant figure. But if I were to put a decimal point in, then all of those ending zeros would be significant. But if I only want this number to have 3 significant figures, I can't not put a decimal point because it would only have 1. I can't put a decimal point because it would have 6. I would start at the left and say I want the 2, the 0, and this 0 to be significant. I would put a bar over that 0, and that would tell me that everything up to that 0 is significant. All right, here are some practice problems for us. The first thing we need to do is look at the zeros and determine whether they are beginning, middle, or ending zeros, and use those rules to determine how many significant figures there are. In this 700, these zeros are at the end of the number. There's no non-zero number after them. Ending zeros are only significant if there is a decimal point in the number. Since this number does not have a decimal point, those ending zeros are not significant. There's only one significant figure in that number. This one has no zeros. Our first rule tells us that all non-zero numbers are significant. So all of these numbers are significant, and there are 5 of them here, so there are 5 significant figures in that number. The zeros in this are at the end of the number, and there is a decimal point in the number. If there's a decimal point in the number, the ending zeros are significant, so the 6 and all 3 ending zeros are significant. There are a total of 4 significant figures in this number. These zeros are at the beginning of a number. Beginning zeros are never going to be significant. The decimal point does not play any part in beginning zeros. That only matters for ending zeros. So these beginning zeros are not significant. Again, they're important. They do need to be there, but they're not significant. Only the 6 is significant in this number. 690. That 0 is at the end of the number. There is no decimal point, which means the ending 0 does not count as significant. It's important, but it's not significant. So only the 6 and the 9 are significant figures. In 108, this 0 is in the middle. It's in between 2 non-zero numbers. Middle zeros are always significant, so this one has 3. 550, the 0 is at the end. There's no decimal point, so that 0 is not significant. There are only 2. Up here, we have zeros in a couple of different places. These zeros are at the beginning of the number. Beginning zeros are never significant. This 0 is at the end of the number, and there is a decimal point in the number. So this ending 0 is significant. So the 7, the 3, and the ending 0 are significant. There are 3 significant figures in this number. Here we have an ending 0. There is a decimal point. 4 non-zero numbers, so there will be 5 significant figures. In 2001, those 2 zeros are in the middle of the number. Middle zeros are always significant, so everything in that number is significant. These zeros are at the end of the number. There's no decimal point, so these ending zeros are not significant, only the 7 is. 450.0, these zeros are at the end. There is a decimal point in the number, so they are significant. So there are 4 significant figures. 350. This 0 is at the end, but there's no decimal point, so it is not significant. Only the 3 and the 5 are. This number has no zeros in it, so we know everything is significant. This 0 is in the middle. Middle zeros are significant. So this one has 3. The next number has zeros in 2 different places. These zeros are at the beginning, so they are not going to be significant. These zeros are at the end, and there is a decimal point in the number, so these zeros are significant. These zeros are not, and the 6 and the 2 are significant, so there are a total of 4. All right, here we have a middle zero. Middle zeros are significant, so there will be 5. Here we have 2 ending zeros, but there's no decimal point in the number, so those will not be significant. So a total of 2 significant figures. Here we have 2 ending zeros, and there is a decimal point in the number, so those ending zeros are significant, and we have 4. In this number, we have a middle zero. Middle zeros are always significant, and we have 2 ending zeros. There is a decimal point in the number, so those are significant as well. We have a total of 5 significant figures. 52.0, this is an ending zero. There is a decimal point in the number, which means that ending zero will be significant.